Well, welcome everyone to another Maddy Associates speaker series. We are really fortunate today to have three of probably the top experts in the state on water with us today. And I think it's interesting, I noted that at least two of them have worked in other countries, and so they can tell us maybe what the situation is like in France and Spain as opposed to California, or maybe it's the same, maybe it's different, but it's just a wealth of experience. I'm just delighted to have them with us today. So we have with us today Alvar Escriva-Bou. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I mangled that. I apologize. He's an expert in groundwater sustainability. We have Andrew Ayres, who is an environmental and natural resource economist. And finally, Ellen Hanak, who is the head of the Water Policy Center at the Public Policy Institute of California. They've done really phenomenal work, and a lot of people rely on them. I know I do, as a go-to source for information on water policy. So with that, I think I want to start the conversation. And what it will do is, I'm just going to pose some questions, and folks from PPIC can just jump in whenever they want, raise your hand or unmute yourself, and you guys just have a conversation here about these topics. So what we're talking about today are kind of a market-based solution to California's water situation. And I want to kind of start off first with, very quickly, maybe Ellen can start with this, just a very brief overview of why we're here in terms of Sigma, just so everybody's starting from the same starting point.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark and Lupe, for the invitation, and hello everybody who's joined. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. And Robert, I love your Baby Yoda, your Grogu thing. That's what my grandson has PJs that have that on there. So he's a popular feature in our house. Anyway. We just were talking with Mark and did a recording actually for the TV and radio broadcast on this. This is Mark caught a report that we issued about a little bit over a year ago now, looking at improving California's water market in the context of thinking about also getting to groundwater sustainability. PPIC has been looking at water trading for a long time now, and we try to keep an update going regularly of sort of what's happening with water trading, and also with groundwater banking in the state. And in the context of Sigma, some of these issues really kind of became even more interesting to folks. So just quick sort of stage setting is that water trading in California has been pretty active since the late 80s, early 90s. That was really when the market got jump started. There was a major drought, and the state got very involved in directly acting as a broker and buying and selling water. And that kind of, there were a series of reforms that within the Central Valley Project in the early 90s, as well as sort of more generally in terms of California legislation, designed to make it easier for folks to trade under some circumstances. And trading really kind of took off even in wetter years after that major drought. So it kind of the volumes increased up until the early 2000s, I would say, and since then it's kind of leveled off. But what we've seen in terms of shifts is more long-term and permanent deals, and fewer short-term, single-year deals than there were before. So kind of in some ways a maturing market. The sellers are usually, but not always, agriculture. The buyers are mostly agriculture, but also cities and also the environment. And up until now, most of this trading has been surface water, because that's kind of what the laws were sort of set up most easily to monitor and to authorize and to approve. And so water moves, a lot of this water moves very locally within the same county or within the same region, but there is also a certain amount of cross-regional transfers, especially from the Sacramento Valley, which is relatively water rich usually, to the San Joaquin Valley, where you all are, as well as to coastal or urban areas. Now, with Sigma, there's an interest in folks that are in basins that have deficits. There's definitely increased interest in buying some of that surface water, getting more of that surface water to come in. But there's also a new kind of framework created that's going to facilitate local groundwater trading. And this is in its early stages in some of the basins. There has already been active groundwater trading in some adjudicated basins in the southern part of the state. And Andrew has done extensive research on, for example, in the Mojave Basin, where they adjudicated and started water trading pretty quickly after that. There are a few other basins like Chino where that happens also. So there's some roadmaps for that. But we're starting to see now, like in the Tule Basin, there's the beginnings of some trading in the context of Sigma, and in a few other basins, there's some pilots that are happening. So I'll stop there because I've been.
Yeah, I want Andrew to kind of follow up on what you're talking about, given his research. But before that, I want to ask Alvar just real quickly about how the drought has impacted all of this. I mean, we're going third year of drought. Is this accelerating the interest in this? What's your take?
What we see usually in droughts, there's two effects. So usually at the beginning of the drought, we see a lot of trading when people kind of actively are seeking for water and trying to get into these trading agreements. When we have a long drought, what we see is that there's not much water to trade. So, and also, the way that we trade water, there's a lot, for example, of trading from the Sacramento Valley to the center, to San Joaquin Valley, and also Southern California. The conditions of the delta and the canals and all that, it's complicated to get a lot of water going through. So we see that usually in the driest years is complicated to do more. We don't see we could expect an increase, but we actually don't see because there's not much water. There's another situation. There's a lot of we call informal trading. Informal trading is like within irrigation districts. They actually, farmers can get together and actually do trading among themselves. And that happens a lot. And it's really difficult to report that or actually to know how much of that happens. But we know that happens. This year, for example, we saw in the Sacramento Valley, some irrigation districts had really low allocations. Some of them had, cutbacks of 80%, 80. So some irrigation districts just decided, okay, I'm not going to use this amount of water because I have a lot of losses in my canals and all that. So I prefer just to give this water to sell this water to others, and actually with that. But yeah, the summary is that usually in the beginning of the drought we see a lot of interest, but when we are in longer droughts like this one, when we have these driest years, it's more complicated to get water because the situation, there's not much water, and the situation of the canals and the conveyance systems are more complicated.
We may have to modify that phrase. He who has the gold makes the rules. Maybe it's he who has the water makes the rules. Andrew, you've looked at some of these pilot programs in local basins. What are you finding?
Well, Ellen mentioned just a moment ago the example of the Mojave. So this is not a pilot under Sigma, although I can talk about those a little bit as well. This is an adjudicated groundwater basin, meaning that the users of groundwater within this area went to a court and they said, we have a plan for determining who has the ability to pump how much water every year. And as part of that, they also set up a system of rules that would allow them to trade that water across parties. So a lot of folks think that the Mojave, which is one of the most liquid, if not the most liquid groundwater market that we have in the United States today, can be potentially a good model for some basins under Sigma. So just to give a few parameters around what happened in the Mojave. So the Mojave is the driest desert in North America. And historically, it had water developed both for urban uses, so growing in urban areas, especially in the latter half of the last century, as well as agricultural pursuits, a lot of growing alfalfa in the desert. This led in the middle of the 20th century to really, really quick and extreme overdraft of their groundwater aquifer, prompted the adjudication in the late 80s and early 90s, and set up a system whereby people could trade. A lot of this trade happens from agricultural users to urban users. But what's really important here is they grandfathered everybody in at the amount that they were pumping before the adjudication. So they gave everybody the right to pump what they've been pumping historically, which permitted continued overdraft, and they've been ramping this down over time. As they ramp down how much everybody's available to pump, that creates an incentive and a need really to trade. So when the cities are getting ramped down, they have to go to the low value agricultural producers and say, we're interested in buying some of your water. And this has prompted a lot of trading in the basin.
I mean, the question that it kind of begs is, you were talking about litigation going on for the 80s and 90s. So it sounds to me like litigation was going on for a while. Is that what it takes, litigation, to force people to get along?
Great question. So if we're just looking at the adjudicated basins in California, of which there are roughly 20 and change, maybe 20, 25, some of those very difficult. They've taken multiple attempts to go to court and actually hash out a solution over the course of a decade, maybe 2 decades. There are other examples of friendly adjudications where the parties all generally agree on what the rules should be and who should be pumping how much water, or who should get the right to pump how much water, and those can be done within a year. The fact that we've seen persistent overdraft in some of our critically overdrafted basins in California, and they haven't been able to hash out these solutions up until now, suggests that those may be more difficult cases.
Well, the critically overdrafted ones, if I'm not mistaken, are in the valley.
The valley is mostly critically overdrafted basins, but there are critically overdrafted basins outside the valley as well. For example, in Salinas.
I mean, one of the things, frankly, is we need to learn how to get along and share resources. But with that transition, Ellen, I want to kind of go back to this idea that you've been talking about, this water trading and water banking. So how would that system work generally?
So, I mean, I would say a lot of folks are already pretty familiar with some form of water trading within the San Joaquin Valley. And, as an example, in Westlands, pretty much every year they buy water from outside, because there's a lot of productive land there, and the allocations are often below what folks would need, and they don't have great groundwater resources. And there's a lot of trading and exchanges that happen along the Friant system as well. So there's a fair amount of kind of trading, and as Alvar mentioned, also within districts, sometimes some districts really kind of encourage and facilitate that. But when we're thinking about kind of trading across boundaries, across between irrigation districts, in different places, most usually that happens with, the local districts have to kind of agree to that, right, and have a policy about that. And they might, this is where some of the sort of challenges come in, is that some districts just don't want water leaving. They want to keep it local, even if some growers might want to sell their water to someplace outside. But if let's assume the district is okay with doing it, with selling water, you also need the approval of somebody else, at least somebody else, and probably multiple other folks. So if it's Central Valley Project water, that can be pretty straightforward to get that approval, if it's within the kind of same region. But if the water is going through the Delta, that's a whole another can of worms, because you've got to make sure that there are a lot of restrictions on when water can move, and the water that's traded is kind of at the bottom of the pecking order. It becomes, even if it's senior water rights that you're trading, that goes down to below everybody else that has water rights to trade. So it can be hard to move water during certain times through the Delta, and that can be a huge bottleneck. You've got to get approvals a lot of times from the Fish and Wildlife agencies, both on the federal and state side. In addition to kind of offering up the opportunity for folks to object if they think that their own water rights and might be impacted, because there's a basic rule that you're not supposed to cause injury. So one of the things that we heard, and we did a lot of scoping with stakeholders in the valley, in the Sac Valley, in the San Joaquin Valley, and in coastal urban areas around this, was that the approval process can be clunky. And sometimes you want to, especially if there's an opportunity, say there's a storm, you want to have a chance to quickly move some water. You got to move fast, and those opportunities can be missed because we don't have a simplified enough process for that.
I don't know if Elvar or you can answer this question, and I hope it's not a naive question, but I'm just thinking about groundwater sustainability agencies, those agencies that are responsible with implementing SGMA. Are they nervous about trading because they want to keep some in reserve, that may cause a problem with them getting their basin in balance, or their groundwater in balance?
Actually, it's not a naive question. It's a really great question. I would say that there's different scenarios or different type of basins. For example, those that have low overdraft might not be so interested in trading, might just try to, maybe to increase supplies or to do something to get to balance. When you have larger amounts of overdraft, and even with lower amount of overdrafts, but what happens is that trading actually is a tool for your basin to reallocate the water. So there's a lot of interest from some people to actually get more water, especially from those that have high value, crops or interests. For example, perennials. If you have perennials and there's a long-term investment, so it's and then it can be thought as a tool for you to actually kind of let the market a little bit to do the reallocation job, instead of you being prescriptive on saying, okay, you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do this. So they just set a cap for people and they allow for trading. What it's true is that it's not easy and it's complicated. As Sandy was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of issues on the allocation process and then the trading mechanisms and all this stuff. So it's not everybody's right now doing that or like effectively. But we know for a fact that there's basins that have already started the process in the San Joaquin Valley, and many more. I think that most agencies are somehow interested. The difference with surface trading here, I think that it's important to understand a little bit. When you are talking about groundwater trading, you usually are not saying, I'm going to sell this water out. You are just keeping the water within your basin. So it's not that you are kind of selling your water out. So that's important. In surface trading, you actually can sell your water out. So there's maybe for surface trading, there's more reluctance from some basins, some counties to actually sell water out that actually can reduce your agricultural, economic importance or activity. But on groundwater trading, it's like you are keeping the same amount of water, but you are reallocating, the water across your own users. It's a tool that you are providing for your own users to actually to get benefits from themselves. So I think that there's less reluctance on groundwater, but it's true that it's not easy. It's a complex thing.
So how does this fit with SGMA? I mean, is this the silver bullet that's going to solve the problem?
So I wouldn't say, there's one, it's actually trading doesn't create water. That's an important thing. So if you are overdrafted, you have the same problem. What trading does is that minimizes the costs of any potential reduction. Let's put another example. So for example, we saw this last year in the surface trading arena. Last year, a lot of agencies in the Sacramento Valley, a lot of farmers, especially rice farmers, sold their water to other farmers and also to cities. So maybe we didn't see a lot of big problems last year. We didn't see any city running out of water because these folks actually made did their homework and actually were buying water, and rice farmers actually were willing to sell that water. So that minimized the cost that we had last year on the drought. So we didn't see huge amount. We have been working on the economic assessments, but the main point is that the economic costs when you have trading kind of be reduced because you can reallocate the water to the high value uses. For the statewide perspective, that means especially cities having water. when you are thinking about farms, so usually it's high value crops which are willing to buy water. And that's what happens also in Sigma, right? So you are not creating new water, but actually you can reduce the costs of transitioning to sustainability because you can keep higher value crops, higher job crops alive.
Right. You're making more efficient use of water. So someone's asking about water futures, and would this be of interest in areas with a high proportion of permanent crops?
I don't know what I can take it. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how water future works. The main thing, I think Ellen and Andrew can talk more about this, but the main thing is that when you are talking about water futures, you actually are not trading water. There's not water involved. It's a bet that you are doing in Chicago or in the stock market, just to diversify your portfolio, thinking that maybe droughts are not correlated with other investments that you have. But the main issue is that water futures actually there's no water involved in that trading. It's just that you are betting that next year, the drought will be better, so we will have less droughts and the costs are going to go down. So it's a complex thing, but there's no water involved. So our water futures, so maybe Andrew,
we are seeing some trading in water futures. These water futures are based on an index of water prices throughout California that a firm, Westwater Research, in collaboration with other partners, publishes. So they publish this sort of composite index of water prices. And building on what Alvar was saying, you're not trading water. You're not expecting actual delivery of an acre foot of water when you're contracting over a future here, but it does allow producers to lock in a price essentially for future water. So you can write a contract over a future price of water, and your counterparty will pay you the difference if the price of water goes beyond that, for example. And so this can in principle be really, really valuable, as the question suggested, for folks who are really exposed to shifts in water prices. So for folks who are growing orchards. Up until now, we've actually seen sort of less trading on this water futures market than people might have expected up front, but it is active. Folks are trading on this water futures market. And I think one of the things that's really interesting from my perspective is, it'll be interesting to watch to what extent having an index and having a water futures market sort of incentivizes new parties to get involved in the process of generating new information about the market. So better tools for forecasting water availability and water demand and things of that nature.
Now, I wanted to point out in the report, if I'm getting this right, from the PPIC, that you're saying that local trading of surface and groundwater could reduce regional economic costs of pumping cutbacks by 40%. And trading surface water across basins could keep more high value crops in production, reducing costs by another 20%, provide additional economic benefits. I mean, those numbers, almost 2/3, it sounds like a pretty decent solution to a problem.
Ellen, you want to take it?
Sure. I mean, giving full credit, those are all Alvar and our colleague at UC Merced, Josue Medina Zuara, did that analysis for a report that we released in 2019 on kind of looking at Sigma in the Valley. And yeah, I mean, it goes to show that having that flexibility to move water around can be a really valuable tool. It's, we did those calculations without just assuming complete flexibility, right? For surface water and flexibility for groundwater within basins. You would probably need some infrastructure investments to move some of that surface water around. And you would also probably want to limit some of that trading in certain places. So like some of the groundwater trading in places where if there's an area where there are a lot of domestic wells, say, and somebody wants to buy a lot of groundwater, buying groundwater means pumping more water where you are. So that could create, well interference effects at the local level. So probably those numbers are a little bit optimistic, but it goes to show why there's already a fair amount of trading in response to scarcity in the San Joaquin Valley, because agriculture is, farmers are business people, right? And they're working to make this all come together. The big lifts now, besides infrastructure and kind of finding ways to kind of simplify the permitting without getting rid of protections to make sure that the trading is not causing unreasonable harm to other users. The big lift is on the groundwater side, and it's basics for getting in place accounting. So it's some of the stuff that needs to happen anyway as part of Sigma implementation, but you can't really trade unless you already have groundwater allocations.
Yeah, I want to get to some of the kind of the essential aspects of these watermarks to make them work effectively. But someone did ask, let's see if I missed it. It was, and they're asking if any growers or lenders are basing their decisions on water futures. Do you know of any of that going on?
So I'll just say on the water futures has generated so much media attention, outsized relative to what it is. It's also, generated proposals for legislation to ban it, both in Congress and in California. But as Alvar and Andrew kind of highlighted, it's just a financial risk management tool. I don't know, at this point, there's not a lot of volume of trading. I don't know if there are any growers that are using it super actively. We heard from some growers when it first came out that there's another tool which is just a weather
Right.
derivatives, right? Which might be in some ways more useful for growers in a particular area, because they know where their water comes from, and they can kind of more directly link that up to the weather derivatives up to that concern, because the water futures price is a weighted average of water prices across California, and I can tell you that those prices vary a lot. So early days for that market, I would say.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the essential features of these essential markets, and one thing is infrastructure, right? And someone asks about the challenges of trading that have been identified within some basins as the physical constraint of actually trading. Well, let's talk about infrastructure and the need for that to make this all work. We have a pretty good infrastructure system of moving water around, but I guess it could be improved.
Yeah, I was responding to that. This is a really good question. So let's talk again. We have to differentiate a little bit about groundwater trading and surface water trading. In principle, when you are talking about within basin groundwater trading, you don't need new infrastructure, because we are lucky somehow. The physics of groundwater, how it works. Water moves, and actually, when you take out water from one place, actually gets replenished from other places, or it kind of tends to be stable over time, or moving through lower elevations. So in principle, on groundwater trading, we don't need infrastructure, but there's some issues that have to be really considered, which is that you can create, if you concentrate a lot of pumping in one area, you can actually decrease a lot groundwater elevations in that area, bringing groundwater there, but also causing problems in that localized area. So there's issues that have to be considered. On surface water, we need infrastructure. Yes, we do have. Actually, it's California is one of the places in the world where we have kind of most kind of long distances infrastructure. We can move water from Shasta to San Diego. I was telling that to some students last week, and they were really surprised. But that doesn't mean that we don't have constraints. There's a lot of constraints. It's not easy, for example, in the San Joaquin Valley to move water from east to west. We have the Franker Canal in the west, in the east, sorry. We have the California Aqueduct in the west. And then we have the Crosswater Canal, but it's not easy in many places. You have to think that we have these infrastructure that are like the CBP and the State Water Project, long distance infrastructure that is thought to move water from one part to the other, especially from the Delta to south, and then from Millerton to other places in the eastern side. But usually, irrigation districts have their own infrastructure, so it's just constrained to their own, district. So there's not many places that have connections across districts. So that's one thing that actually we have been highlighting, I would say, and I'm trying to work on that. We have been trying to think about working on that. We don't have good studies about the specific bottlenecks for trading, but it's not only for trading, it's also for groundwater recharge. Because when you have a lot of these big floods or big storm events, maybe some of these connections within this, across districts or from the California aqueduct to other places where actually you could store water, they are not ready yet. So,
Alvar, that kind of begs the question. We're always talking about dams and surface storage for infrastructure, but don't hear a lot about canals. Is there more of a move in the legislature to think, hey, maybe we need to be thinking about infrastructure, the canals, as also part of this equation?
To be fair, the Department of Water Resources, the California Water Commission, they are actually working on this, or at least they are studying these issues. There's other researchers also working on this, but yes, conveyance is a big bottleneck. It's not only to kind of stop, especially for groundwater recharge. When you think about that, in 2017 and 19, we had good examples. We had a lot of water that we couldn't capture. Right. There's also kind of the regulations, and that some of them are improving, but you have to be able, when you have few weeks where you have like these big gulps of water, to actually to move water, to bring the water to the places that you can store it. So, and it's it's mostly on groundwater basis.
Right, and with climate change, that's going to be more and more important. Andrew, I wanted to ask you about setting up these markets. One thing you've talked about is clearly defined property rights, and also you talked about the importance of accounting. It seems like it's all basically on one word, trust. But can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So in the past and in pilot projects under Sigma, when we talk about groundwater markets, the first thing that people do is they set up an accounting system, because without it, you don't have a basis to trade. So this accounting system needs to be based on a solid understanding of sort of the physical characteristics of the system. How much recharge are you getting? How much are people pumping today? Are you going to be ramping down how much people are able to pump? You need to resolve questions like that. And then you need a good way to measure it. So there are different ways to measure groundwater extraction. In some cases, they use meters. Meter readings can be self-reported. In Fox Canyon, they're using sort of remotely reported meter readings, so immediately telemetrically reported from the meter to the central regulator without having to read the meter at all, without having to have a person read the meter at all. There are alternatives to that. If you don't want to put meters on wells, you can use remote sensing information to estimate how much water a crop's using on a particular parcel. So that's a evapotranspiration estimation via remote sensing. There's a case study in the Valley, actually. Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District has set up an accounting system that uses OpenET, so an online platform that reports parcel by parcel how much water is being used on fields, to help as a portion of their accounting system, basically using that to understand how much are people withdrawing from the groundwater aquifer.
One of the things also that I want to talk about is kind of the bottlenecks, the stumbling blocks, and making all this happen. Ellen, could you comment on some of those things that are kind of hurdles that are in the way?
Well, so one of them in the new era of Sigma is just getting the groundwater governance really into shape, so that folks feel confident that the water use is being monitored, what's coming in, what's going out. You need to do that whether or not you have trading and groundwater banking set up, but those are kind of preconditions, and those are starting to happen. It's not an overnight process, though, I would say. Then you've got some of these infrastructure constraints, some of which are kind of local, so there, as Alvar mentioned, sometimes just having some local connections, additional local connections can help on trading, as well as on moving groundwater to recharge areas. And then there's just this whole issue of kind of making sure that the approval process kind of balances the need to avoid significant undesirable results from trading, making sure people are only trading what's theirs and making sure they're not causing problems for others, but also still allowing trading to happen, which can provide a lot of benefits. And I think, we're in a place where there's room for improvement. That we keep getting certain kinds of improvements. There were some reforms recently in the state water project that make it easier for different state water contractors to do more flexible management of their water than before. In the CVP, there's been some improvements on that front as well. There are discussions at the local level in a lot of places about what we do now. Now that there's SGMA and with the changing climate, do we further kind of relax some of our rules, or do we tighten them? And it's a place where, I mean, I see we have a lot of growers on the call. It's a place where it's important for growers to weigh in terms of some of the local policies there, I would say.
What they say is why do bank robbers rob banks? That's where the money is. I'm thinking, again, a person who's not an expert at all in water, but most of our water seems to come from the Delta. So how does the Delta play into all this? I mean, are they open to this? Do they see this as a good idea? Are these good ideas? Are they resistant? What are you hearing?
I'll start on that, and maybe my colleagues will chime in. So actually the valley imports through the Delta are important for the valley, but it's not the major source of water. There's more water actually comes from the local watershed. But Alvar, I can't remember now. Is it like 20%?
It's a quarter.
A quarter, yeah, about a quarter on average, right? Over a long-term average. So it's definitely important, and the Delta, there's no question that you could view that as an infrastructure bottleneck. And there are infrastructure proposals that would make it more flexible, including the tunnel proposal that would basically allow at certain times you could pump through the tunnel instead of down at the pumps in the South Delta to avoid harming fish and things like that. There are estimates that could allow more water to move. It's especially interesting perhaps in thinking about these really wet years and the big gulp years, and how do you kind of allow more water to get to the valley in those situations. But it can be relevant in some dry years too, when you've got certain kinds of storms. So it's not really up to the folks in the Delta per se. That's Fish and Wildlife on the federal side. It's NOAA Fisheries on the federal side. It's Fish and Wildlife on the state side. It's the State Water Project. It's the Central Valley Project, who are junior water right holders. And so they have an interest in not having somebody sell their water. So it's a complicated mix of things. And we have the Delta Stewardship Council, which is in charge of implementing a rule that everybody who depends on the Delta should not increase their dependence on the Delta. And so that's kind of we write about that a little bit in this study on improving the water market in the era of SGMA. It's kind of in tension with the goals of SGMA, because the San Joaquin Valley has to reduce its water use. It would be ideal to be able to actually increase the share of water coming in from Northern California, probably by increasing the share in wet years would be the safe play for that. And, we probably need some infrastructure improvements as well as some regulatory relaxation to do that.
I was talking with Andrew earlier, and we were taping the TV show about what maybe the different levels of government, local government, state government, federal government can do to make sure that it's a level playing field. You want to make a few comments about that?
Yeah, certainly. So as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the keys here, if we're talking about trading, is more information about water supply conditions, public information about water supply conditions, but also public information about who holds entitlements, who can trade them, and what we might expect from prices. So good information, making sure everybody has information about who the market players are, is one important piece of this. Another important piece of sort of leveling the playing field, or just making sure there aren't unintended impacts of trading, is setting up robust systems that, while allowing for easy, low-cost trading, also document and address third-party impacts. So that's an important piece on both the physical impact side. So, if we trade water away, that might mean we get less groundwater recharge, and on sort of the economic impact side.
I just want, Matsumoto was asking about municipal users. What role do they play? And just talking about the example of Coalinga, with amount, they're huge amount for paying for water. How do they fit in all of this?
I think Andrew, right? Andrew just led a report last year about this exact issue. So, on urban.
Yeah. So
Not about
in general,
not about Coalinga.
right? Not about Coalinga, but in general, in the valley cities are also subject to SGMA. Many of them are highly groundwater reliant. In fact, most of the cities in the San Joaquin Valley are entirely groundwater reliant for their supply. They're going to be facing at least some sort of constraint moving forward. Exactly what that looks like will depend on the specifics of how their GSA and their basin address the issue. As they continue to grow, one of the other takeaways from that report was the Valley could expect an additional 1 million residents by the time SGMA's timeline comes due in the early 2040s. So we're going to see growth. We're going to see constraints on water supply, groundwater access for these cities. Exactly how they respond to that might involve some approaches like recharge. It might involve some other approaches like cities banding together to access surface water where they're now currently totally groundwater reliant, but as another option, operating through markets to access new water on a long-term basis, on a permanent basis, potentially on a long-term basis. We've seen some long-term transfers from agricultural water districts to cities already in the past 15 years or so, and then also during drought, potentially on the leasing market. So this could be an opportunity for cities in the future to flexibly address these constraints. And I'll just note, like, really quickly, again, when we talk about new groundwater markets, the example of the Mojave comes up again. In that example, really it was cities driving a lot of the transactions, buying from low-value agricultural users when the cities were feeling the pinch of increasing population growth and ramp down of the groundwater supply.
And just on the urban issue, just to chime in a little bit more, the large cities generally have are pretty well resourced in terms of good technical staff, good planning. They are much less likely to get caught in the kind of situation that Coalinga did. It's the smaller, we hear a lot in droughts in particular about the very small communities, sort of domestic wells going dry, tiny communities that are well reliant going dry. Coalinga actually is, surface water dependent. They don't have groundwater, usable groundwater there, but it's one of those tiny cities that is not really, hasn't had the sort of planning resources to get out in front of the problem. And I think, one of the things that the state has been focusing on really since the last major drought is trying to improve the ability of smaller systems to kind of do better drought planning. And coming in with some technical support and whatnot. So, my hope is that we're not going to see this kind of specific problem in a place like Coalinga on a repeated basis, but that they're going to basically get a more resilient plan for how they deal with a shortage of Central Valley Project deliveries.
One of the things that was asked here is, and it's very common in legislation, are the unintended consequences of any kind of governmental action, which is very true, but by definition, it's unintended, so therefore not probably known. But is there anything that can or should be done to try to mitigate any unintended consequences of water trading and water markets?
Can I jump in first on this, because I think that's a question from Don. Hi, Don. How are you doing? so I would rather not refer to this as kind of obstructionist so much as kind of recognizing that there's tension between having a soft landing with Sigma and having 20 years to kind of get to full sustainability. And that was, it was done intentionally, to recognizing that if you had to go cold turkey overnight and stop pumping, on average 2 million plus acre feet of groundwater a year, that would be really a hard adjustment for the valley. So the law says you can get there over time, but the law also says you cannot cause significant undesirable results, significant unreasonable undesirable results in the meantime, and that includes ruining infrastructure by causing terrible land subsidence, which is bad for water users up and down the valley as well as outside of the valley. It includes not causing significant impacts to people's access to drinking water, and there are a variety of other things. And on the coast, it includes seawater intrusion, right? So the challenge we've got especially in a drought, and Sigma doesn't say thou shalt not pump more during a drought either. It's long-term sustainability, but the challenge is in a drought, there's less surface water, growers are going to pump more, and there's a desire, if you don't already have a well, to put in a well. And we've seen well drilling increase, and there's a fact of well interference, right? And so having a way to balance that out and figure out how to do that is going to be important. So I don't know whether AB 2201 was the right solution. I know that the executive order back in the spring, around the same theme, caused a lot of questions and consternation. But I think, there's probably room for folks from representing different interests around this to figure out how to do this better, so that, because growers don't want the folks in their communities not to have drinking water either, right? So how do we figure this out? And it doesn't mean no pumping. It means figuring out how to either find alternative supplies for folks who'd be impacted, or having those wells located in places that aren't going to cause that kind of interference.
And this kind of can bring us full circle to something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is mediating disputes. I do a lot of work in mediation of employment disputes, which is, I'm well outside my lane here talking about water, but I want to go to ask Alvar and then Andrew, and we can end with Ellen with this last question about what do you think can and should be done to promote local and regional collaboration when it comes to water trading and banking? Is there anything that you'd recommend to increase that collaboration? So Alvar, we'll start with you.
That's a great question. I'll use actually an example from the question that Ellen was addressing before. It's that I think that better understanding of the situation, better data, better knowledge about the situations can help us get to agreements. For example, the situation about the dry wells and pumping during droughts, for example, for agricultural purposes. There's a lot of papers and documents and everything, and we know that for a fact. It's relatively cheap to pay for new dry wells if you compare that with the potential costs of not pumping for agriculture. So if you cut down 20% of agriculture, the economic costs are like billions of dollars. And maybe addressing or mitigating these dry wells that, in advance, of course, we could have good plans for that. And there's also, engaging the people and these small communities, disadvantaged communities, to participate in the GSA process, in the Sigma process. But the cost of paying for these new wells is at least one order of magnitude lower than the cost of no pumping. So what I mean is, if everyone understands that it's relatively cheap to pay for new wells, if we can actually pump more during droughts for having less costs on agriculture, or maintaining jobs and all that. So that could help us. If everyone on the table could sit down and understand these numbers, and let's put a plan all together. I think that can help us, actually achieving sustainability in a way that everyone is happy with, and that can be in a participative way.
So is that possible, Andrew? We can make everyone happy here?
I don't know about making everybody happy. That's usually the tall order. When we're talking about trading, first of all, I think one important aspect here to improve regional coordination is going to be finding a solution for fallowed lands. So again, we've talked a little bit, both in the show earlier and in this conversation, about potential economic impacts in selling regions. The fact of the matter is that implementing Sigma is going to mean some land's going to come out of production. Selling water might mean that land comes out of irrigated production here instead of somewhere else. If the state and other regional entities, even counties, can come together to find a way to provide new promising opportunities for those lands, that's going to help reduce the impact on those local communities and stoke some of the trading and integration and coordination that we think can be really valuable. The second thing is, leaving trading aside for a second, just the foundational question of getting people on board with new groundwater management systems. And so that can be scary, but also that can just be very difficult for folks in the sense that they're going to suffer losses from not being able to pump groundwater in the interim. And so finding a way to make what might look like a loss for them into a win can be really important in getting them on board. And so sometimes that can be accomplished through the allocation process, especially if you plan to have a market later on, making sure that folks get an allocation that then they can both use on farm and capitalize on the market in the future when water is scarce, can really go a long way towards turning a potential loss into a win and stoking some of that cooperation for generating new groundwater management systems.
Ellen, I want to give you the last word.
Okay, well, and there's an interesting kind of thread in the chat which kind of relates to the question of the small low income communities that are up and down the valley, which provide a lot of the workforce for agriculture. They often have drinking water challenges on the quality side. They're vulnerable to drought, and there are a lot of questions about how to manage this in ways that are going to be okay for them. Alvar mentioned some things in the chat about ways to kind of improve quality of life for folks in these situations. We've been looking at kind of how do you ensure that there's not going to be an increase in dust that's going to be impacting these folks. Andrew led a study that came out this past summer on that, and there are definitely ways to do that. On the water side, one thing that's really clear is that you got to give these folks a decent initial allocation of groundwater, because they're groundwater dependent, and that was not well addressed in a lot of the initial groundwater sustainability plans. I think that's a work in progress. So if they've got a decent allocation to begin with, they have way less reason to be worried about trading, because they're going to have their allocation, and they can just decide not to trade it, and they may decide to participate in banking programs and all kinds of things. If they don't have that asset to start with, then of course they're going to be scared of this.
Well, I want to thank, with this conversation could go on and on, but I want to keep to our timeline here. I want to thank our guest, Alvar Escriva-Bou. I think I got that one right.
That's great.
Thank you for your patience. You've always been very patient with me on that. Andrew Ayres and Ellen Hanak, great work at the PPIC. I really encourage folks, if you've got a water question, the first place you ought to do is go to the PPIC Water Policy Center. You're probably going to find the answer there. So thanks very much for spending some time with us today, and we'll see you at the next Maddy Associates Luncheon Series, which, by the way, is going to be about the future of agriculture. That's going to be after Thanksgiving, so it's on Wednesday, November 30th. Hope you can join us for that conversation. In the meantime, have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.